Excuse me, sir. Is that a Confederate flag?
My ancestors died fighting that flag. It's an insult.
If it bothers you, you can just look the other way.
Excuse me, sir. Why are you wearing that jacket? What do you think when you see a symbol?
Racism.
A lot of things bother me, but I let it go. I wasn't raised that way. I wasn't raised with racism.
But how are we supposed to let it go, Kathy?
It's every day. We hear it now.
Tuesday night, starting July 7th, What Would You Do is back with an all-new season.
Let's do it.
And in times like these, with all that our country's facing,
It brings tears to your eyes.
It brings tears to my eyes every day.
it fills me with amazement to see people standing up for each other.
Be his friend and support him. That's it.
Over and over.
I think you got to be the bigger man than that.
And over again.
Be kind to him, please.
People reaching out.
You can't read the menu?
I'm not drunk. I'm a veteran.
You've been wasting my time.
How you doing, buddy?
Hey.
Good. Tell me how I can help.
Standing up for strangers.
He's just a crazy veteran.
You need to walk away. If I get up, I'm telling you it's gonna be an issue. Walk away.
Choosing to do the right thing with no idea hidden cameras are watching their every move.
Everyone deserves a chance.
And this season, nothing is off limits on What Would You Do.
Coach, I'm gay.
Just give him time. He'll be fine.
I really like this lady.
Did you?
Yeah.
Things are different now in this world. He doesn't realize it.
The world is changing, but it's people. I could even get like emotional talk. It's like people like you.
From the outrageous
Yoga pants aren't for everyone, and you're proof of that. Excuse me?
to people in need of a helping hand
Would you really pay for him?
with an open heart.
I just feel bad that he got me as a mom. I feel really overwhelmed.
Or just lending an ear to a stranger in need.
Postpartum depression is a thing that women deal with all the time, you know, and like being a mom is hard.
I'm John Quiñones.
Hi.
This is Sarah Haynes.
Oh, God.
I can't even tell you how touched I am. We need people like you.
Join us Tuesdays for an all-new What Would You Do season America Needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
So what will millions of Americans be watching Tuesday nights this summer on ABC?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The amazing and uplifting new season of What Would You Do premieres Tuesday night, July 7th at 10, 9 Central on ABC.
My favorite show.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you for being here. Thank you, David. Dr. Gavin, thank you very much. It's good to be here in the Bay City area of Michigan. I'm really honored to be part of the President's Speaker Series. And I'm especially happy here because I've read all about Delta College. This is a college that's all about appreciating diversity and the thoughts and the ways of other people. I love the school's focus to widen the classroom experience, to challenge all of you to think deeply and to act responsibly. And of course, I can relate to all that because I do a show called What Would You Do? That's all about that. So you've been warned. Like, we can put those hidden cameras anywhere, like in this room, right? If you're sitting there, the person next to you passes out and you step over them to go get another drink, you're going to have me to talk to afterward. It's great to be here. I'm a reporter, I'm a storyteller, and that's all I ever wanted to do. And it's great to be back in Michigan, by the way, because as you mentioned, Dave, I was a migrant farm worker with my family, so we picked cherries in Northport, Michigan, north of Traverse City, when I was 13 years old. More about that later. But, you know, that's why I do this show, and that's what I learned back then, that there were all kinds of ways that people look at certain people because of the color of their skin or the accent in their voice. People used to follow us around up in Traverse City because they thought we were going to steal something because we spoke with a funny accent and because we weren't dressed the right way. And that was the beginning of me wanting to shine a light on issues that affect this country as a reporter because of where I come from. As I was saying, I'm a storyteller. My profession as a network reporter, I get the opportunity to shine a light on a lot of issues that a lot of people don't want to hear about and don't want to talk about or see. I mean, I created What Would You Do 15 years ago, because I wanted to hold up a mirror to American society. We wanted to know, how do you unlock the power and the light that exists in each and every one of us, so that we're all better equipped to say, you know what, that's wrong, or how can I help? And what better tool to do that with than with hidden cameras, right? And on national television. What would you do poses that very question. When you witness any kind of injustice, gay bashing, someone being ridiculed because of the color of their skin or the accent in their voice, condemned because of the religion they practice, when you come face to face with bullying, spousal abuse, and the little voice in the back of your head says, do something, do you step in or do you step away? What would you do? I mean, after all, isn't that the very definition of a person's character? What would you do? It's not what we do when people are watching. That's easy, right? It's what we do even when no one is watching. It's all about doing the right thing. And you know, we all face these moral and ethical dilemmas in both our personal and our professional lives all the time, regardless of what we do for a living. It doesn't matter whether you're a student here, a college student at Delta College, or whether you work in education, or the legal profession, or healthcare, or politics. God knows politics. What would you do there? It doesn't matter whether you own and operate your own business, or if you work in my profession, the media, journalism. Young people, kids in high school, even elementary school, face these dilemmas every day. The question is, what do you do with that opportunity to right a wrong? Do you sound the alarm? Do you lend a helping hand? Or do you just go about minding your own business and walk away? You know, silence is complicity. We have to raise our voices in this country. I think now, louder than ever, because these are difficult times in America. I've never seen this country as divided over so many issues. And I grew up during the civil rights movement back in the 60s and 70s. I think part of the reason has been the pandemic, you know, COVID. Over the last few years, there's been an increase, and there's science that proves this, there's been an increase in anxiety, an increase in depression, an increase in the demand for medical services, mental services. In other words, these days, a lot of people are on their very last nerve. People are angry, and they take it out on just about anyone they encounter, especially people in the service industry. We just don't filter ourselves the way we used to. And the latest figures from the FBI show that hate crimes in this country are the highest level they've been in a decade. And most of the victims, 62% of them, have been targeted because of their race, because of their ethnicity, their ancestry. I mean, all you have to do is watch the news or scan, you know, go on the internet. All the cell phone videos that go viral, the impassioned chants of Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. During the pandemic, all the debates and arguments over wearing a mask, right? Or getting vaccines, the fight over Confederate symbols, as you saw there, or statues. When do you leave them up or do you tear them down? The condemnation of Muslims, transgenders, the LGBTQ community. And then an issue that, you know, was disturbingly more evident during COVID also was the attacks on the Asian community. But of course, another issue very close to my heart, the boiling debate over immigration, right? With Latino families being separated from their loved ones down along the US-Mexico border, not far from where I grew up. Separated, people who too often pay with their very lives simply because they were pursuing the American dream. What would you do? You know, over all these years of doing the show, we filmed over 1,000 scenarios. And when we started, I thought I would run out of ideas. I mean, how many of these can we do, right? And we started 15 years ago. These were all ethical dilemmas that were based on situations, all based on real situations we ripped right from the headlines in the news. I get messages on social media every day saying, John, I had a what would you do moment today. I thought you were going to come out. And you didn't. Like, I'm only one man, you know, I can't be everywhere. They happen to everyone, but especially people who have been marginalized, right, in society, or people of color. It's even happened to me. I mean, here I am thinking I'm a famous television reporter. I got my own TV show. Well, the other day, I was at an airport in Dallas going back to New York. And I was lucky enough to be flying in first class. So I'm waiting at the gate to get on board the plane in the first class line, right? And then I noticed that to my left, all the other first class passengers, by mistake, have lined up in the economy line, which happens, but I was in the right place. So I'm standing there. And suddenly, the lady in front of that line looks over to me and says, "Sir, are you even flying in first class?" And by the way, I was wearing a sweatshirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. No one recognized me. So she said, "Are you even in first class?" And I didn't want to start an argument, so I just pointed to the side above my head, which said first class. And I nodded. And she said, "Well, the first class passengers are over here." And I didn't want to bother telling her they had formed the wrong line. I just started walking. She said, "So get to the back of this line." So I started walking to the back of the line. And on my way to the back of the line, she said, "The announcement was made in English. We speak English in America." And then other people waiting in line. Finally, someone recognizes me from television. And they said, "John, is this a what would you do scenario?" And I'm like, "No, this is the real thing." And as I'm standing in the back of the line getting ready to get on the plane, my only concern was that I was going to have to sit next to this mean lady on the airplane, right, for 4 hours to New York. But I got on the plane and no, she was by herself. No surprise there. And as I walked past her, I couldn't resist. You know, I leaned over and I whispered to her. I said, "Ma'am, my name is John Quiñones, and I do a TV show called What Would You Do? And you would be perfect for the show. You could play the part of the racist." True story. Honest to God, true story. So it happens to all of us. And that's why we do this show, because the country needs it more than ever. I got the other great compliment on social media the other day when someone on Twitter wrote, "The world would be a better place if we all thought John Quiñones was in the next room monitoring our behavior, because of course we would be on our best behavior." Of course, doing this show all these years has made it impossible for me to go have dinner or lunch anywhere without people saying, "What's going to happen? Where are the cameras? What are you doing here?" Well, I'm trying to eat. The good news, as I was telling somebody earlier today, the good news is when I'm at a restaurant, people are on their best behavior. They're helping each other out. They're leaving bigger tips, pulling out chairs for older people. So how do we do it? How do we become active bystanders who step up and do the right thing instead of just passive observers who ignore the injustice? How do we do that? Well, I think it starts in the home, and those of you who are educators here know that very well. Very often children learn to discriminate, to bully, to think they're better than other people as they're growing up. You know, there's that great song from an old musical, South Pacific, called, which in part says, "You got to be carefully taught before it's too late," the song says. You got to be carefully taught before it's too late. Before you're 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate, you've got to be carefully taught. But of course, you also have to be carefully taught, you can be carefully taught to be more accepting, right? To be more loving, to be more compassionate. I think it's as simple as putting yourselves in the shoes of the victim. And you know, in some ways, it's easier for those of us who have been marginalized, those of us who have been victimized by all of this. People of color, the Jewish community, the LGBTQ plus community, anyone who has been marginalized. And after all these years of doing What Would You Do, I have found that time and again, the people who step up and do the right thing are people who themselves have been the targets of racism or bullying or gay bashing or spousal abuse. They sound the alarm because they know what it's like. They know how painful it can be. They've been there. And that's why, as I was saying, in many ways, I feel like, and I was kind of born to do this kind of show because of where I come from. the world that I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and the hurdles that I had to leap over. You see, a lot of people who only know me from television, who see me up there with the great people of ABC News, you know, David Muir, Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer, George Stephanopoulos, Robin Roberts. People who only know me from television have no idea the long, hard struggle that it took for John Quiñones to get to ABC News. I was born in poverty, as I mentioned, in the barrio, in the poor neighborhoods on the west side of San Antonio. And you know how some people say, we were poor, but we didn't know we were poor. We knew we were poor. We had an old black and white television, and we saw how the other side lived. My father was a janitor. My mother cleaned houses on the rich part of town in Alamo Heights in San Antonio. We didn't speak a word of English growing up. This, despite the fact that my family, the Quiñoneses, have been in Texas for 7 generations. But my father dropped out of the 3rd grade to pick cotton in South Texas. My mother dropped out of the 4th grade also to help support her mom. So they didn't learn much English, and in San Antonio you didn't have to learn English because the corner store, La Chicanita, where we did business, was all in Spanish. The church, the Mass, was in Spanish, the Catholic Church. All the music that we danced to and listened to was in Spanish. So I never learned English, and this was before bilingual education. We couldn't afford preschool. My 2 sisters and I couldn't afford preschool or kindergarten, right? We didn't have enough money. And in San Antonio, 50% of the population is Hispanic. So I get a kick out of these days when people say to me, John Quiñones, Mexican-American, when did you come across the border and come to America? We've been here 7 generations. I tell them, you know, people forget that Texas was once part of Mexico. Texas was once part of Spain. And by the way, so was California, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, even the names are in Spanish, Utah, and parts of Wyoming. But who's counting, right? I tell people, I didn't cross the border crossed me. You know, suddenly we're learning to speak English. And don't get me wrong, I'm very proud to be an American, but didn't speak a word of English when I went to the 1st grade. So I'll never forget being in Mrs. Gregory's 1st grade class at 8 in the morning, first day of school. Again, no preschool, no kindergarten, no English. She doesn't speak Spanish, so I'm there twiddling my thumbs, wondering what the heck's going on in the classroom. And at 10 in the morning, the school bell rings, and it's recess time. So all the children go out to the playground. Where does little Juanito Quiñones go, 6-year-old Juanito Quiñones go? I went home. I lived a block from the school, right? So I get home, and I go through the front gate. My dear mother, Maria, saying, Juanito, ¿qué pasó? What happened? I said, Se acabó. It's over, Mom. I like school. 2 hours and you're done. And this is going to work out very nicely. She grabbed me by the ear and she dragged me back to Mrs. Gregory's 1st grade class because she knew the value of an education, not having gotten one herself, right? They used to punish us for speaking Spanish in school. Our coach in junior high had this big old wooden paddle with holes drilled in it for extra speed and power. And they would give us 3 spankings, the boys, if they caught us speaking Spanish. Do you know what that does to you about your identity and your language? But that's the way it was back then. My father made $50 a week as a gardener and then as a janitor, but he was laid off. I remember in 1965. And my 2 sisters and I, and my mother and father, did what a lot of Latino families had to do back then. We joined a caravan with strangers, people who were headed north from San Antonio up here to come pick cherries at the cherry capital of the world, Traverse City, Northport. And I remember it was tough because these people were strangers. We didn't know whose truck we were in. There was big semis, and we were in the back of the truck with strangers. And then at one point, as we were coming up north in Indianapolis, just outside Indianapolis, we got lost, separated from the caravan, and we were running out of gas, and we stopped at a church. And my mother, who was devoutly Catholic, went in, she said, I'll take care of this. She talked to the priest, and he came out and gave us some gas money. And I remember a gallon can of green beans and a loaf of bread. And we lived on green bean sandwiches all the way to Northport, Michigan, where we picked cherries. And I'll never forget being on top of a ladder, overlooking orchards, beautiful country up there, orchards and orchards of cherry. I don't have to tell you guys that. Cherry trees, and with a bucket strapped around my neck, teetering on the top of this ladder. And they paid us 75 cents per bucket of cherries, and it would take me 2 hours to fill that big darn bucket with cherries. That's like 37 cents an hour, right? And after we did that for 6 or 7 weeks, we followed the crops down to Ohio. So we picked tomatoes outside Toledo, Ohio, Swanton, Ohio. And man, that's where we picked tomatoes. And I was a champion tomato picker. I did 100 bushels a day, and they paid us 35 cents per bushel. Well, that's $35 a day. And my father would do 140 bushels. And my mother contributed, and my sisters contributed to it. And we learned the value, as many of your families here have tonight, the value of a family coming together in times of difficulty, right? And pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. But I'll never forget being on my knees on the cold, hard ground at 6 in the morning with my father, Bruno, his name was Bruno, looking at a row of tomato plants that for a young 13-year-old boy's eyes seemed to go on for miles and miles. That's what I had to look forward to that day. 6 in the morning, cold, hard ground. And my father looking down and saying, Juanito, do you want to do this kind of work for the rest of your life? Or do you want to get a college education someday? It was a no-brainer. I knew that I didn't want to do that kind of back-breaking work for the rest of my life, but no one believed in me. I was the kid who was not expected to amount to much. When I came back to school in San Antonio, public school, and I asked my teachers and my counselors, how do I prepare for the SATs? How do I prepare for the ACTs? How do I take advanced placement classes in math, biology, and English? Do you know what my own teachers and my own counselors would say? They would look at me and they'd say, Johnny, it's wonderful that you have this dream of someday being a television reporter. Because I wanted to be a reporter since I was 13. I would watch a guy named Geraldo Rivera on 2020, right? Remember Geraldo? And I wanted to be like Geraldo. He traveled to Turkey and South America, all over the world. He had a mustache and blue jeans and long hair. And he was cool and smart and great. But he was the only one with a Hispanic last name on national television. So I would ask my teachers, I want to go to college. And they say, it's wonderful that you have this dream of someday being a TV reporter, but we think you should try wood shop or metal shop or auto mechanics. Not that there's anything wrong with those trades. A lot of people make a good, hard living doing that kind of work, but I wanted to go to college. And my own teachers and my own counselors would do what people do on that TV show, What Would You Do, every Friday night. They judged me by the color of my skin and the accent in my voice. But thank God for my mother, Maria. Maria, man, she was the one who kept inspiring and motivating and pushing. She would say, mijo, my son, mijo, don't be embarrassed about having to wear the same clothes to school every other day. We wash them, right? They're clean. She would say, mijo, my son, don't worry so much, and don't be embarrassed about having to take bean and tortilla tacos for lunch, because we would take refried beans and flour tortillas for lunch. Don't worry, don't be embarrassed about that. We would take that while all the other kids are taking their fancy bologna and white bread. Hey, now we know beans and tortillas have more protein, right? They're better for us. We didn't know that then, and I was embarrassed. But my mother would say, no, mijo, what matters is what's in here, in your brain. In your cabeza, in your brain, and more importantly, what's in here, in your corazón, in your heart. So she was the one that kept me going. You know, it was during the Civil Rights Movement, and I remembered the words of Martin Luther King, who once said, in times of adversity, you got to have faith. And faith is taking that first step. It doesn't matter if you can't see the entire staircase, just take that first step, because tomorrow, there'll be another step. And the next day, another baby step. So my first step, wanting to be a TV reporter someday, was to get rid of my accent, because I had a heavy Mexican accent. I grew up speaking Spanish as my first language. So I would say things like, these are my shoes, this is my shirt, because in Spanish, there is no SH sound. It's all a hard CH. It doesn't exist, the sh sound in Spanish. And I knew that if I was going to be like my heroes, Geraldo and Peter Jennings and Tom Brokaw and Dan Rather in network news, Walter Cronkite. I'd have to get rid of my accent. I'd never get hired with a heavy Mexican accent. So that was following the advice of Martin Luther King. In times of adversity, take that first step. You don't have to see the entire staircase. My first step was to get rid of my accent. So I joined a drama class. I was also painfully shy. I wouldn't come out of my shell. I was really shy. And I knew, how in the world can you be on television if you're so shy? So I forced myself to get into drama class. And I would advise this for any of the students. Drama class, getting in front of a stage and talking to an audience does so much for you. I don't care what you're going into. It doesn't have to be journalism, law school, or medicine. The way you deal with people, the way you enunciate, the way you present yourself, right? So I fought against all my fears, and I tried out for the role of Romeo in Romeo and Juliet for a citywide production in San Antonio. Maybe it's because none of the other boys tried out, but I wound up getting the job. Right? I was Romeo. And the good news was that I got to kiss Juliet. Mary Lou Gomez. I wonder, she was my first girlfriend. And we had to practice kissing behind the stage because we wanted to be convincing as Romeo and Juliet. Huh? That was the good news, Juliet. The bad news was that I had to, in this very macho Hispanic school, I had to wear leotards with my skinny legs up there, and I'm glad there was no YouTube back then, kids, because those videos would be living in infamy today. There is a snapshot of me, but that's it. But that helped me, that helped me move forward, and it helped me slow down my voice, my delivery, because I used to speak really fast like a lot of Latinos do. And it allowed me to speak from my diaphragm and reach the back of the auditorium without a microphone. The great African-American poet Maya Angelou once wrote that we all marvel at the beauty of a butterfly, right? We look at a butterfly and we marvel at the gorgeous colors and the wingspan and how gorgeous is that, but seldom do we consider all the changes that that butterfly has to go through to attain that beauty. And I'm no butterfly, but I tell you, I went through some changes, me and my two sisters, Irma and Rosa Maria. And then along came my first hero in my life, and besides my mother and father, and it was my English teacher, Mrs. Gutierrez, 10th grade English class. When everyone else was telling me that I wasn't college material, that I should try wood shop or metal shop, she was the one who said, Johnny, I love the way you write stories. I love the way you tell stories and you write your essays in English class. Have you thought about journalism? I said, of course, I've been watching Geraldo. No, she said, I think you should talk to the man who runs the school newspaper at the high school, at Brackenridge High School. So she takes me at the age of 13 and introduces me to Mr. Harris, who ran the school newspaper, the Brackenridge Times. And I was hired as a reporter. So I've been doing this since I was 13. And within a couple of months, I became the chief of editorials. Well, big deal. You're laughing. Wait a minute. I deserved it. Because there I was writing these big investigative stories, like, why are the teachers parking in the students' parking spaces, Tonight we go undercover and find out. My first, what would you do? And I loved it. And then along came another hero, and heroes sometimes don't have to be people. In my case, it was a government program, anti-poverty program, federal government program called Upward Bound. I don't know if you know of Upward Bound, but man, it saved my life. I was one of the 10 Upward Bound students taken from my school, and what it was, under the Kennedy and Johnson administration way back then, it was a government program to fight poverty. The government said they knew that the inner city schools were doing a terrible job of preparing us or not preparing us for college. So the government stepped in, and every Saturday of our high school career, they gave a certain group of students extra courses in math, biology, and English, just what I had been asking for of my teachers. Not only that, they paid us $50 every Saturday to go to these classes. And man, that saved my life. Every summer of my high school career, we went to live on a college campus. Like it was a university, much like this. It was a small university. And I got to live on a college campus for 6 weeks, me and 12 other students from my high school. And you know, it was a big deal for me to experience that at the age of 16 and 17, and for my parents, because no one in my family had ever gone to college. I was the first one in my entire family. And it taught my mother, who was very protective, that it was okay for her little boy to go away to college. She still didn't get it. She still wanted me home. I remember when I left to go to Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas, which is 45 minutes from my house, saying goodbye to my mother in the driveway. You would think I was going to Vietnam. She was like, mijo, when am I going to see you again? And it's like, Mom, this is only 6 weeks, and I'll be back Saturday with some dirty laundry, and I'm going to want some of those bean and tortilla tacos. So we taught them a lesson, too, about how it was okay to go away for their son to go away to college. And I loved it. Thanks to Upward Bound, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for this program that today a lot of people would consider welfare, a government handout, right, to the poor. Well, for me, it was a lifeline. It was a lifesaver. From there, I got into St. Mary's University in San Antonio, and the program helped me get into school there. I had 3 jobs. I worked in the geology department at St. Mary's, in the cafeteria. And at night, I have to be careful how I say this, because when I say I deliver drugs, they say, of course, you're a Latino, you're a drug dealer. No, I worked at a pharmacy where I got to bring little old ladies and older gentlemen their medicine, because they couldn't go pick it up at the medicine, so at the store. So I would drive a big old beaten up Volkswagen, and I would bring medicine to their homes. But between my deliveries, I wanted to be a reporter so badly. I had a little cassette recorder, and between my deliveries, I would go into the men's room, and I would read everything I could get my hands on and practice and play it back and slow down my delivery. And at one point, one night, the owner of the pharmacy heard me through the men's room door, and he said, Johnny, you really want to do this? I said, yes. I was 18. He said, well, I know the general manager of a radio station here in San Antonio, and they're looking for interns. And that's my advice to all the students here. Get an internship. Whatever it is you want to go into, try an internship. Even if you're not getting paid, it gives you an idea of whether you like that kind of work. Law school, medicine, whatever, journalism. So I kept bugging him, and he introduces me to the general manager of this radio station. Now, I was 18. I loved rock music, R&B music, Tejano music. This was a country music station, and I wasn't a big fan. I like it now, but not so much when I was 18. But it is a job, right? It was an opportunity. So he takes me there, and I meet the general manager of the radio station, and they hire me as an intern for $2 an hour. So you got to be from Texas to understand this, but as part of my job as an intern, the disc jockeys, you know, the guys who play the music, had horses in the back of the studios that they would use in public appearances, like rodeos and parades, because they were big local celebrities. My job as an intern was to go to the back corrals, feed the horses, and clean up the horse poop every night. Part of my job. But also at night, after that, I would go into the studio in the back of the station where they had these beautiful reel-to-reel recorders, tape recorders, and gorgeous microphones. You kids have all digital now. Back then it was tape. And I would practice on the microphone, whatever I could get my hands on, to read whatever I can, and to play it back and practice, slow down my delivery and all that. The only problem was at that hour of the night, the professionals who could help me with my delivery were gone. It was midnight. The only one there to criticize my work was the janitor, and his name was Pablo Gonzalez, and Pablo's English was worse than my father's. But I would drag him in and say, Pablo, listen to my recording. What do you think? And he would listen and go, más o menos, it sounds pretty good. And then they let me do something on the air for the first time. They let me go on the air at this little radio station in Texas. There'd be some new medicine out, and I got to tell you where you could go buy the medicine. So you want to hear what the first words John Quiñones ever said in the radio? You want to hear what I said? All right. For $2 an hour, I got to say, now available at Walgreens. That was it. Now available at Walgreens. And I would call my aunts and uncles, and you got to listen at 1:12 this afternoon, but don't blink because you'll miss it. And then they let me do the news. You know, this is how you start, step by step, following the advice of Martin Luther King. You don't have to see the entire staircase. They let me do the news on Sunday nights. It was really Monday morning, between 2 and 4 in the morning. I got to do 5 minutes of news between all the country music. And I think we had 4 listeners. My mother, my father, and my 2 sisters. But that's how you learn. That's how you learn, step by step. And from there, I got a job at another radio station. And then no one would hire me in television in Texas. In local television, no one, everyone had their one Hispanic reporter. And it's like, we don't need another one. We got one already. And it made me feel terrible. I mean, I was depressed because I really wanted to get into television and no one would hire me. And it's funny how life is. I met a woman at an audition for a job that I didn't get. But she had gone to Columbia University in New York, this Ivy League school in New York City, the Graduate School of Journalism. And I was so depressed that I was going to give up journalism and instead go to law school or try to get into law school. And I told her my story. And she said, John, don't do that. I can tell you have such a passion for telling stories. Don't give up journalism. Don't go to law school. You're going to be a lousy lawyer. You'll be bored out of your skull. She said, I went to Columbia University, and if you'd like to go there, I will write a letter for you and vouch for you. As an alumni, they put a lot of credence into that. So I wrote a couple of essays for Columbia's Journalism School of Graduate School of Journalism, and I was accepted. So then I said, great, how am I going to pay for it? Right? It's like $20,000 in New York City. And I went up there, and my advice to all the students here, never give up. Never think that because you don't have money, you can't get in. I knocked on every financial aid door at that university, and I begged them. I said, look, I've been accepted to your wonderful Ivy League school, but I can't afford it, so I need a loan, a grant, you know, job, whatever you can. And they submitted my name to a fellowship, like a scholarship, that was sponsored by NBC News. And I got it, and it paid for everything. And it's so funny now that I've worked for ABC News 40 years, but my education was paid by the competition, NBC. And I loved it. And from there, I got a job right away, thanks to that master's degree in journalism. I got a job in Chicago as a local TV reporter. And it was while I was in Chicago that I did a story that I wanted to do for a long time about an issue that I mentioned earlier, immigration. My family was here legally. I was born there for 5, 6 generations, right? But I knew a lot of people who would come over illegally, and I wanted to do a story about what are the push factors that make someone risk their lives crossing the Rio Grande, right? Leaving their mothers and fathers and children and girlfriends and families behind. How bad must it be for you to want to cross the desert in Arizona or the river in the Rio Grande to come get a job here as a dishwasher for very little money, or a roofer? So I convinced my news director, my boss in Chicago, to let me go undercover. So I told all my friends, I'm going to go undercover. I'm going to pose as a Mexican. They had the same reaction. Like, it's not going to take a lot of acting, right? No, but I posed as a kid. I was 26 years old, 27, in Mexico, who wanted to come to the U.S. So I went to Mexico. I dressed down. I spoke only Spanish. And I met with a coyote, a smuggler, who for $300 sold me a fake birth certificate and a fake Social Security card. By the way, today the going rate is like $18,000. But back then it was $300. And with hidden cameras, you see me paying the coyote in a church courtyard. And then he said to me, okay, tonight, meet me here on the banks of the Rio Grande at 7 p.m., and I'll ferry you across on an inner tube to the U.S. He thought I was just another Mexicano, right? He didn't know I was a reporter. So I go to the other side of the border, the Texas side of the border, I tell the camera crew where to hide in the bushes. And then I went back into Mexico. It was very easy to go back and forth back then. So I meet up with my coyote, and he puts me on an inner tube. And I was worried because I was wearing a wireless mic like this under my shirt. And he wanted me to take my clothes off, because you put your clothes in a plastic bag. When you swim across, when you get on the other side, you put on dry clothes. Otherwise, the Border Patrol will know that you just crossed the river, right? But I was nervous. I said, I can't take off my shirt. He'll see the wire. So I convinced him to let me keep my shirt on. He didn't care. and he puts me on an inner tube and pushes me across the Rio Grande. I think I'm the only American to cross the border illegally the wrong way, you know? The other way coming in. And I didn't stop there. Because this was for a story in Chicago, right? For the local TV station in Chicago. So I went to a restaurant in Chicago where we had heard that the owner of this Greek restaurant on the outskirts of Chicago in one of the suburbs had 7 undocumented workers working for him, and he had not paid them in 17 weeks. Nothing. And every time they complained, he would say, hey guys, you get to sleep here in the basement. You get to eat all the food you want. You keep complaining and I'll call immigration and have you deported. Which, by the way, happens in this country today. This is 40 years ago. So I went there pretending that I just arrived from Mexico, dressed down, obviously speaking only Spanish. He didn't know me, that I was a local reporter. He didn't know that. The owner hires me. So I'm a dishwasher. So by day, I'm washing dishes with the other 7 undocumented workers, bussing tables. And then at night, I went down and I slept in the basement with those guys next to the dishes and the silverware and the boxes of food and cans of food. And I still wonder what those workers must have thought. Because by day, I was up there bussing tables with them, right? And washing dishes. And at night, I pulled out a little camera and I started interviewing them in Spanish about their lives. And they told me through tears how they were being held as virtual, hostages in that restaurant. Well, the next day I came back to work, this time wearing a suit, speaking fluent English, with a camera crew behind me. And I remember we had to chase the owner of the restaurant through the parking lot because he didn't want to talk to me about what he was doing to those workers. But the day after my story aired on CBS, local in Chicago, my story about crossing the Rio Grande on that inner tube, my story about working in that restaurant, the day after it aired, the US government moved in, they shut down the restaurant, they got the Mexican workers the money they were owed, and temporary visas to remain here while they worked on their residency. And I knew then that those are the kinds of stories that I could tell perhaps better than anyone because of where I come from and because of that other language that I speak. I call journalism the candle in the darkness. Imagine this room is pitch dark. There's been a terrible storm outside. The electricity's out, no lights, and we're all stumbling around looking for an exit. We can't even see our hands in front of our faces. Well, the journalist, he or she, is the person with a little candle or the little flashlight, and they can shine it on the darkest corners of the room to illuminate injustice, to illuminate corruption, to illuminate human rights violations, civil rights violations. I think when journalism is done right, those are the kinds of stories that we should be telling. We don't always get it right, especially these days, but those are the kinds of stories that we should be telling. That story won my first Emmy Award, and ABC News in New York was watching. Peter Jennings was watching, and they offered me a job at the network. And I was based in Miami to cover Latin America. Ironically, to cover Latin America because I spoke Spanish. We had an Anglo reporter by the name of Bill Stewart, ABC News. If you Google Bill Stewart, ABC News, you'll see what happened to him in 1979. He had gone to cover the war in Nicaragua. Those older folks might remember there were wars going on in El Salvador, Nicaragua, the Contras, the Sandinistas, right? They sent him from New York, didn't speak a word of Spanish, to go cover the war. He's stopped by some military soldiers at a checkpoint. They take him out of his car. They shoot and kill his translator. And then they take him behind a hill. And then they start questioning the correspondent, this great correspondent, Bill Stewart. He doesn't speak Spanish. So they tell him to get down on his knees. The camera crew is filming from about 50 yards away. They thought it was funny. They didn't know the translator had been shot. They thought it was just comical that the correspondent, Bill Stewart, couldn't communicate with the soldiers. So they start rolling on it. And on camera, you can Google it, you'll see it happening. They tell him to get down on his knees, and they put a gun to his head, and they shoot and kill the correspondent, Bill Stewart. The networks, in all their wisdom, then said, that was a big story. It got on the news everywhere. And in fact, the dictator in Nicaragua, Anastasio Somoza, fell. The rebels took over because of that video, because it was reported they were killing, it's out of control, they're killing journalists in Nicaragua. But the story aired, the networks then, in all their wisdom, all three of them, CBS, NBC, CNN, they all said, we should hire somebody who speaks Spanish to go to Latin America. And there I was in Chicago with my little Emmy award from swimming across the Rio Grande, and I was hired as a reporter 40 years ago with Peter Jennings. So my dream came true. I got to work for ABC. And I covered all kinds of stories down there in Latin America. I went to Cuba, many times, El Salvador, Nicaragua. I covered the invasion of Panama. My producer was kidnapped, taken hostage by the military in Panama. It was crazy, dangerous. And I worked with my hero, Peter Jennings. You remember Peter Jennings? He was the best. And but he was also very intimidating. The guy was very handsome and fancy suits and spoke with a British accent, although he's Canadian. And he was very intimidating. To me, a young reporter, he was like James Bond, right? Like Agent 007. So I'm hired, I'm down in Nicaragua, and one of my first stories, I get an exclusive interview with the president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, who, by the way, is the president again today in Nicaragua. He's an old guy now, but he was a young revolutionary. And back then, I guess it was 1982, he gave me an interview. He liked me because I spoke Spanish. So I called New York, and I get Peter Jennings on the phone. It's one of my first big stories. And I said, Peter, it's John Quiñones in Nicaragua, and I have an exclusive interview with Daniel Ortega. And he said, fine, young man. I don't think he knew my name. Fine, young man. I look forward to having you on World News tonight on the network newscast. And he hung up. I hang up, and the phone rings again, and it's the president's office in Nicaragua canceling my interview. Now, the news in New York, the show had made a 2-minute hold in the broadcast for my story, and it's already 4:30. The news is on at 6:30, and now I got to call them and tell them it's not going to happen. So I'm shaking in my boots because I got to call Peter Jennings and tell him that the story ain't going to happen after all. So I thought I was going to get yelled at or fired, this brand new rookie reporter. And instead, Peter Jennings gave me some words of advice that I carry with me to this very day. He said, young man, this is going to happen again in your career where someone promises you something and they don't deliver. He said, listen to me. Don't worry so much about talking to the movers and shakers of the world. The presidents of countries, politicians, people who run corporations. He said, don't worry so much about talking to the movers and shakers of the world. Concentrate instead on talking to the moved and the shaken. In other words, talk to the real people out there. As a Latino reporter, you can go into the countryside of Nicaragua, El Salvador, Panama, and you can talk to folks because you understand the language, you speak the language, you understand the customs. Give a voice to people who don't have a voice. Talk to the campesinos, the peasants, the real victims of war and natural disasters, right? And earthquakes and hurricanes and mudslides. Give a voice to people who don't have a voice, and you will be a successful reporter. Talk to the moved and the shaken, not so much to the movers and the shakers. Well, to this day, I carry that bit of advice with me, and it changed the world. That's all I did for about 20 years down in Latin America. And then I started doing this crazy show called What Would You Do? And it's the one show that people recognize me more than anything for, especially young people. And I leave you tonight with my favorite What Would You Do story. We were doing a scenario, because I'm often asked, what was your favorite? And we've done 1,000. But we were doing a story on what would you do if you're walking down the sidewalk and the person in front of you collapses, right? They fall to the ground. They could have had a heart attack, or they could have just fainted. You don't know. And we did it at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, when people were in a hurry, by the train station in Newark, New Jersey, when people are getting ready to go to work or go to school, right? 8, 9 in the morning. So now you have that added element. Not only do you not know anything about medicine and how to help someone who is down, but you're also in a hurry. You don't have time to do it. What would you do, right? So at first, we did it with a well-dressed businesswoman. in her 40s. She's walking along, an actress, right, who falls very convincingly. She's a stunt artist. So she was our actress. She's walking along, she collapses. Every time she fell, this 45-year-old woman, well-dressed, people stopped to help. Man, they put a coat over her. They fashioned a pillow under her head. They called 911. Everyone did the right thing. And I said, well, that's nice. Who would have thought in Newark, New Jersey, people would be so nice? But what if we change things a bit? And instead of a well-dressed businesswoman, it's an older man who's the victim, who collapses, who's in his 80s, and he's homeless. So he's dirty, filthy, smelly, and he's holding a beer can in his hand. So we got an actor to play that part. An older gentleman, in New York, you can get all kinds of actors, right? So he was great and very convincing, you know, and his name was Bernie. And Bernie's like 87 years old, and he's walking along, and he collapses very convincingly. 88 people walk by, and no one is stopping to help a dirty, homeless man on the ground. People are stepping over him. One lady made the sign of the cross and kept walking and said, wow, this is a beautiful view of Newark. And we were about ready to give up, right? No one is stopping. I said, well, I guess if you're a homeless man, an elderly, no one's going to stop to help. And I'm ready to go on with my cameras the way we always do, to tell everyone it's just a show, right? It was all fake. But before I could get out there, I didn't see anything, but we heard the tapping of a walking cane on the sidewalk, right? We first heard that, and then into the frame of the hidden camera comes this beautiful African-American woman who's stumbling along with a cane, walking cane, because she has suffered a stroke. And guess what? She's homeless herself. And guess what? She stops to help, or to try to help. She starts asking people going by, excuse me, do you have a cell phone to call 911 for this man? 37 more people go by, and no one is stopping. She then leans over and did something we didn't expect. She takes the beer can, because the homeless man was holding a beer, she takes the beer can out of his hand and stumbles over with her walking cane to the trash can to throw it away, as if she was thinking, maybe if I give him a little bit of dignity and people don't think he's a drunk, maybe they'll stop to help. Well, guess what? 43 more people walk by, and we're counting them, and no one is stopping to help. The camera was in this woman's face, the Good Samaritan, and she made a fist to the heavens. I'll never forget, because the camera was really tight on her face, and she made like she was angry. She was angry at God himself, saying, how can you allow this to happen? She was pissed off. And then she leaned over again, and she says to the homeless man, and we could hear it because the actor on the ground, she didn't know he was an actor. She thought he was just a homeless guy, right? But he was wearing a wireless microphone like this one. And she said to him, sir, I don't know your name, but I'm going to call you Billy. She said, Billy, my name is Linda Hamilton. And don't you worry, my man, I'm homeless too. And I'm going to stay here by your side until help arrives. And then finally, a woman stops and calls 911 after hours of this. So then, thank God. So we come out with the cameras in the open. She's our hero. There's a lot of commotion when I come out. People are relieved to see that it's just a fake show, people that it wasn't real. People are excited, they're going to be on television. But in all that chaos, we're having people sign releases to put them on the show. But in all that chaos, our hero, Linda Hamilton, the woman who stopped to help the homeless man, walked away. She slipped away. So we couldn't interview her. Now, we knew her name because she had introduced herself to the man on the ground. And a few weeks later, we put the scenario on television, the segment. We put it on What Would You Do a few weeks later. And the day it aired, hundreds of people called ABC, sent emails, went on social media asking, who was that woman? We want to help her, because we said she was homeless, right? So they start a GoFundMe page for Linda Hamilton. And they take a picture of the video from the TV screen, and they put it on Facebook. A GoFundMe page saying, touched by an angel, touched by Linda Hamilton, contribute. And they raised $8,000 for this woman. So we didn't know where she was. So my producers went crazy. They said, how are we going to get the money to her? So they sent our staff out to Newark, New Jersey with her picture. We plastered it all over homeless shelters, liquor stores, the train station. We were looking for Linda Hamilton. 2 weeks later, we find her. So my producer said, John, you got to come interview her, right? So we can do an update about the hero who stepped in to help the homeless man. So I go to Newark, New Jersey. I sit on some church steps with Linda Hamilton. I brought my laptop to show her the piece because she doesn't have a TV. She had no idea this had been on television. I said, Linda Hamilton, John Quiñones, remember the man who fell a few weeks ago when you helped him? She goes, ah, yes, I remember. I said, well, you caused quite a stir because you helped him. So we got her $8,000 in the bank. ABC News got her a house to live in, an apartment, right? We got her medicine that she was supposed to be taking for her heart that she wasn't taking. And the thing that made her most excited of all, we got her own cell phone. She was jumping up and down like a 12-year-old with her first phone. And I said, Linda, now the next time you see something that's wrong, you can call 911, right? And at the end of the day, I said, Linda, at the end of my interview, I said, people are calling you a hero. People are calling you an angel. They made this Facebook page called Touched by an Angel. Do you consider yourself a hero, an angel? And she looked at me straight in the eye. She goes, no way, John Quiñones, no way. She said, let me tell you what happened that day. She said, I think God put me on that corner, on that street, on that day, because he knew you were there with your What Would You Do cameras. And he wanted to teach people a lesson. And who better to teach that lesson than someone who has walked in the shoes of the homeless? So tonight I leave you with that message. The next time you witness something uncomfortable, when you witness injustice, something wrong out there, and the little voice in the back of your head says, do something, remember the words and the actions of Linda Hamilton, this woman who was homeless, who had suffered a stroke, and yet she stopped to help a man who was down. He was white, she's black. Not that that should matter. She stopped to help a stranger, not because she was going to be on national television. She didn't know that. Not because she was going to get $8,000 in the bank and medicine for her heart and a house to live in and her own cell phone. She did not know that. She did it because, as my dear mother Maria would say, her corazón, her heart, told her it was the right thing to do. Thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Really great. Thank you so much.